All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm happy to welcome back friend of the show, Atlantic staff writer Tom Nichols. How you doing, Tom?
I'm good, Matt. How are you?
My head is spinning.
Yeah.
Have you seen this summer? Have you seen anything like this in terms of the news?
No, no. Like since I first started voting in 1980, this is 44 years where, I can't make sense of this.
I mean, we've had a president convicted of a felony. We have had a debate where the incumbent president fell apart, had a disastrous performance. We've had an assassination attempt. We just had a JD Vance named the running mate. That normally happens every 4 years, but it's still always one of the biggest stories of a campaign cycle. And just the latest, Tom, is that Barack Obama, the last Democratic president, is apparently, according to reporting, part of the effort to push Joe Biden aside.
And let's not skip over that vice president story. I mean, yeah, we've had vice presidents take the nod, and after they've criticized their running mate, right? George Bush and voodoo economics and all that stuff. I don't think we've ever had a vice presidential nominee who said, I think the guy could maybe be Hitler and then take the job. And it's just
crazy times, right? And the fact that that's not even like,
and that's
top
not
10.
the biggest story, right?
Oh, by the way, I have to compliment you on your nice polo shirt there.
Yeah, we got to call each other before we do these shows because now we look like a couple of middle-aged white guys after a round of golf.
Well, hey, guilty as charged. Middle-aged white boy summer, I guess. So let's talk about Biden, about Joe Biden. I mean, where are you at on this? I think there is an argument to be made that you dance with the one that brung you, and you don't change horses midstream, and a whole bunch of cliches suggest you stick with Biden. I think I'm of the opinion that you're better off going with someone else. What do you think?
It's funny because this is a great place in politics where the heart and the head just aren't speaking to each other. I thought that Joe Biden was the right guy to take on Donald Trump. And actually, let me go even further back. I've never been happy about Hillary and Obama. And I use Hillary to differentiate her from the other Clinton, not because it's overly familiar. That the 2016 Clinton, Hillary, and Barack Obama pushed Biden out of the way because I thought he was the right guy in 2016 to take on Trump. And I don't know how many of your former Republican friends said it. A lot of mine said, well, I really can't vote for Hillary, but if it were somebody like Biden, I could live with it. And he got pushed out of the way. I mean, I feel like we should be at the end of Biden's second term, and I think he's done a great job. By any measure, it's been a remarkably successful first term. I know the people on the right, are going to whine about that. And it wasn't a perfect term. He had one major foreign policy blunder. But any other president running at the end of a first term would trade places with Biden in a heartbeat. With all of that said, unfortunately, record and competence and all of those things don't really matter in American politics anymore, and they haven't for a while. And I think, I'm with the camp that says Trump has to be stopped somehow at the ballot box politically. This is where I think we all have to also say, very glad that the former president was not seriously injured by a kid that clearly, I think now didn't have any political agenda. But he has to be stopped from being part of the, from re-entering the Oval Office by every legal and constitutional means. And the first of those being voting. And if Joe Biden can't be the guy who brings the votes, then I think the Democrats at least need to have a serious conversation about who can. And my gripe with the Democrats was that argument, that discussion was being snuffed out. Now they're having it.
Yeah.
My head says, don't stay with Biden. I mean, now that some of the criticisms I think of Biden are becoming really unfair. Did you see the clip the other day when he was on Black Entertainment Television? And I don't think he actually forgot Lloyd Austin's name. I think he was in his usual clumsy way saying that I nominated a Secretary of Defense, a black man, not like he couldn't remember it. But at this point, everything he says is going to get second guessed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, elections are won and lost on this. And they shouldn't be. You know me, I'm a smoke-filled rooms guy. So I guess I'm at, if Harris can do this, and I think she probably can, then they ought to just get on with it, because I'm really worried that Biden just can't carry on a campaign now.
And to your point about the way that he's governed, I mean, I think it's very plausible that Trump's going to inherit a very good economy that has been kind of turned around, and that he'll get credit, sort of the way that Bill Clinton inherited a good economy from George H.W. Bush, and the way that Donald Trump, and kind of inherited some good stuff from Obama, that Trump could get lucky. The guy's incredibly lucky in a lot of regards.
I mean, Trump has been blessed by huge amounts of luck and the incompetence of his enemies. But
definitely,
luckiest guy in politics.
Look, do you think? I think there's a possibility that, even though there's Dems in disarray, Democrats are in disarray, and it looks horrible now, and it's certainly you would not have planned this, but isn't there a scenario where late in the game, changing pitchers, bringing in a reliever out of the bullpen, could actually befuddle the Trump campaign and actually give Democrats energy and excitement?
I think so, but there's no historical analogy here. People keep tweeting at me the comments from the political science professor who has a model that predicts, it's like, yeah, models work right up until the day they don't.
Yeah.
No one's ever seen this. We've never had two former presidents go at each other. We've never had one, like you just said, one president have a meltdown during a debate, another president's a convicted felon. So, I think it's possible that it could be a huge game changer, but that requires the Democrats to run a competent campaign. And, we both know from years of being Republicans that Democrats are not great at that. So I just don't, I think one pitch the Democrats even now could be making that they're not is, and I'm surprised, because this is an obvious one. Look, we the Democrats, right? We have healthy debates about our candidates and whether they should run. Bob Menendez should go, right? Bob Menendez gets convicted. They're like, he's out. You're out, Tom. The great line from The Godfather. You're out, Tom. And Republicans, instead, their guy gets convicted, and they all crowd around him and put fake ear bandages on. It's weird. It's just a weird culty party that I think most people outside that cult are probably uncomfortable with. So, there's a lot of ways to play this. But JD Vance position on this was you have to have the conversation first about whether Biden can really do this. And I think the answer to that for 2 weeks has been shut up. And I don't think that's the right answer to that.
To your point, Tom, JD Vance comes from a weird right-wing philosophy. He's dabbled in a lot of like esoteric stuff, right? Not mainstream Reagan Republicanism.
Yeah, now he does, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
After, deciding he wanted to be a senator and vice president. But yeah, it's this, how do you even begin to explain to voters who Curtis Yarvin is? Like, that the vice president has a fascinating intellectual friendship with a guy who thinks we ought to be a monarchy. It's beyond trying to, the way we started this conversation. Nothing like this ever in American politics. And it's beyond trying to explain it. And I think it's, I'll just be the old man yelling at the clouds and say, a decadent, unserious country now descends into completely inane politics at this point when we should be on top of the world. We've recovered from the pandemic faster than everybody else. The economy is roaring. I think Biden's absolutely right to be angry that people don't give him any credit for keeping an alliance of 32 countries together in the face of an actual no shit war going on in the middle of Europe. And yet tonight, the opposition party, the Republicans, are going to have speeches by Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan. That's not a serious party, and it's not a serious people.
If Hulk Hogan doesn't come on stage to his walk-on music, Real American, then they're not doing their job.
Well, I guess we know that, the Peter Thiel connection there. But again, I mean, and you started to see this. I mean, I didn't like it. Like you, I assume I voted for Romney. I did not like the Republican convention. I didn't like Clint Eastwood's chair stunt. I thought it was disrespectful and stupid and juvenile. But that's what, that's where we're headed. And I would say clearly the right is more guilty of this than the left. But the response to people who have called for Biden to at least think about stepping down has gotten some pretty culty, weird responses, from people who support Biden. I think it's just a reminder that how completely fascinated by celebrity cultism and parasocial relationships we've become in our politics. And it's really scary.
Look, I mean, it's not a moral equivalent, but you could say we've got two old nominees. Neither are fit for office for very different reasons. And both, have enablers who are complicit in lying to us about different things, whether that's the election denial or Biden's, capacity to be president. And again, I mean, I think maybe you go, maybe you go with decrepit over crazy.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's like I don't think Biden's unfit for office. I think he's old, and I'll take a president who makes good decisions from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. over somebody who basically wants to torch the Constitution and pardon a bunch of insurrectionists and create his own army of thugs. I'm just there's no comparison there. I think Biden can still do the job. Will he still be able to do the job for 4 years? I don't think so. But then I didn't think that was possible. I shouldn't say that. I had questions about whether that was possible when I voted for Reagan in '84. Can he do the job for 4 years? I don't know, but he's doing the job well now, and I vote like for people in 49 other states. I voted for Reagan. So I don't want to join you in that false equivalence that they're both unfit for office. One of them is a seditious. Let me not say seditious, because one is he's encouraged sedition, in my view, and is a convicted felon. Normally that would rule anybody out for being like the mayor of a small town.
I think you could say that both are unfit, but one is more dangerous than the other. I don't think that's mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I mean, one is having age-related trouble that is decreasing his ability to be an effective president. There's no doubt about it. But unfit, I won't go there. But the other one is beyond unfit. Is that an actual menace to the country? But again, you've got a point that we've got these two really old guys. I mean, Biden is only 3.5 years older than Trump. Trump gets by it by bellowing a lot. And by being really loud, and because when he falls asleep now, people just kind of take it as given. It's amazing how much we've lowered the bar for talking about Donald Trump. Trump garbles words, loses his train of thought, talks about sharks, and people go, what are you going to do? That I think is that if I were Biden, that would piss me off a lot.
So I was just listening to Ezra Klein's podcast. He was interviewing Tim Alberta, and they were talking about, what's the election about? And Biden wanted the election to be about democracy. People show up on election day, and preserving democracy is on their mind. Biden wins. Trump wanted it to be about strength. Who's tougher? Who's stronger? And it seems like as of now, I don't know if you saw Van Jones had a line, a bullet couldn't stop Trump, but a virus just stopped Biden. Fair or not, it seems like that is the contrast that is winning as of now. What do you think of
I'll
this sort
choose
of?
not when you
What do
say
you think
fair
of
or not.
the
I mean, that cover,
machismo thing? It strikes me that
CNN has really been, I think, their coverage has been a little more breathless than you would expect a news organization to be, I think, about the convention. I'm kind of surprised at how, I didn't see the I caught that later. But even after the Vance speech, and I think, it's part of treating this like a normal convention, and it's not a normal convention. And I don't think it ought to be covered that way.
What do you make of, though, just the idea that we are much more base and tribalistic and carnal and primitive than we would like to believe, and that actually, whether it's Bill Clinton and his swagger, or George W. Bush and his folksiness, but there is a sort of a machismo, like the tougher, more manly candidate tends to win. How much of that is actually hardwired, and whether we want to believe it or not, like that is who's going to win the election?
I think that's been a problem for a long time, that people don't think about, especially with the presidency, they don't think about the president as the steward of Article 2 powers in the Constitution, because most people don't have any idea what's in the Constitution anymore. They want a national dad. And, this is going to sound strange for me to be quoting Rush Limbaugh, but Limbaugh made one observation that really stung back in its time when Bush was losing to Clinton. And he talked about a moment at the Richmond debate with Perot, who shouldn't have been there, but that's, again, showmanship, craziness. Look at me, I'm nuts. I'll say off the wall things. But that somebody stood up at that debate and said, I work with children, and as our father, as the president, who's like a father, and I think Limbaugh called that like the defining moment in that debate or something. And I remember when I heard that, I thought, yeah, that really is true, because I was not a typical voter. Most voters loved that when Clinton got up and said, I totally understand. Bush was like, what the hell are you talking about? And Clinton got up there and he bit his lip and he did his thing. And I just thought, this is nuts. You're not our father. You're a public servant. You're a federal employee. You're being hired for 4 years to be the commander in chief and to create a budget and to sign and veto legislation. We don't think that way anymore. We want our national dad. And we want dad to be tough and caring and share with us and, talk about our feelings. And the whole thing is just, I think, loathsome. But that's what happens. And I'll add one more thing. You brought the thing up about tribalism. I'm going to just do my usual table pound here and say, this is also what happens when you've had 30 years of peace and prosperity and affluence, where people just don't have to take politics seriously anymore.
Yeah.
They want the show now. It's like, everything's fine. Everything will always be fine. The world's not really dangerous. We have 115 channels on cable. We all have really, decent cars and at least a roof over our heads, and who cares? So, make it interesting. Make a show.
I think that's right. So if Biden does go, and there's so much weird stuff going on, I'm discursive today, but if Biden does end up getting pushed out, do you think it's Kamala, or do you think it's like this blitz campaign with Gretchen Whitmer and Shapiro. How do you see that
I
playing?
don't think, people keep pestering me. When I wrote my Biden piece a while back and I said, I don't know who it's going to be. And I don't, that's not the conversation I wanted to have because I thought it was pointless and even disrespectful to talk about it before the president himself had said, yeah, I'm getting out of this. So I think it's Kamala, and I think it kind of has to be. But I also think it's possible that there could be some kind of, I don't know, kind of open, not an open convention, but a big open argument for a few years in the Democratic Party, a few weeks, excuse me, in the Democratic Party, where it ends up being Harris anyway, but with at least some sense that people had their say. They had some input, especially on a vice presidential candidate.
Yeah.
Because I think the guy who made the most sense to me about this over the past 2 weeks was Jim Himes of Connecticut, who called on Biden to drop out. And he said, look, you have to put your emotions aside. You have to put love aside. You have to be cold and rational. I mean, this is, he's singing my song. You have to be cold and rational and think about how to defeat Donald Trump, not who you love and feel warm about. And I think, if Harris can do it and she makes that case, and I think she can, and then teams up with a vice president and they really take the fight to Trump, which I don't think Biden can do anymore. That's the thing that really worries me. He just can't. Then yeah, I think, it's her. But I think also it would be good to have some kind of process validate that in the meantime. Well, I'd even be okay with him resigning and leaving her as an incumbent and then kind of leading with, the other senior leaders of the Democratic Party, just leading through to a new coalition, a new understanding that, yes, I'm the president, I'm the candidate, I have a VP candidate. I don't think this is a violation of democracy. I think it's the way a healthy party reacts to a bunch of unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me. You started off by saying that this could be a conversation for years. You meant a couple of months.
Weeks, I meant weeks. Sorry,
but weeks. But I think the years thing could actually happen if Biden or whomever, if Trump is reelected, what happens to the Democratic Party? I think they may radicalize or go, and they may just conclude that the whole "they go low, we go high" thing obviously doesn't work, and how do they react? How would they react to losing to a guy who's been convicted of a crime, found liable of sexual assault, impeached twice? You know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on what happens next. I think it depends on two things. It depends on what Trump does. There are smarter people in the Trump campaign who are going to say, hey, let's not, start the mass deportations on day one, no matter what we really said, because, we're going to scare the normals and we want to gentle everybody into this authoritarian regime that we're trying to create. If that happens, I think a lot of people will go back to sleep, and that will be unfortunate. If he goes, full on bonkers in the first year, the Democratic Party is going to get bigger by default, just because it's going to be the party of everybody who's not in Donald Trump's cult, which could actually be pretty healthy, is that makes the far left of the Democratic Party proportionately a smaller percentage, which means that you might actually build coalitions that can win elections the way Joe Biden did by building a larger coalition in 2020. The other thing that's going to, I think, will matter a lot is if the Democrats lose to Trump, do they also lose the House and the Senate? If they beat Trump, but actually manage to hold on to Congress or big chunks of Congress, then I think they're going to rightly say this was just a bad bounce. Our guy was old. We had to replace him. Their guy got nearly killed, created a huge, sympathy bounce, et cetera, et cetera. I always said that 2016, when the Trumpers, you and I had this conversation and probably with our friends many times, they're like, see, 2016, it was a great populist revolt. No, it wasn't. It was a perfect storm of weirdness with two of the most disliked people in America running against each other. And so I think the Democrats probably write off 24. Question is, will there be a 2026 or a 2028? And I just don't know the answer to that.
Well, look, here we are talking. It's been less than a week since the assassination attempt. It feels like it was 2 months ago. These news cycles are so sped up, and there's so much craziness that it's really hard to believe that we've kind of moved on to a certain degree. What do you make
I just
of?
add one thing, Matt,
Yeah,
of the
please.
assassination attempt? I think we're moving on because it's becoming increasingly clear that the narrative that many Republicans tried to establish that night, crazy radical leftist, radicalized, in my piece about this in the Atlantic, I pointed out that the guys at Real Clear Politics had gone with radical leftist, online, and then they just stealth edited it out. They were so certain that was going to happen. And when none of that happened, I think people went, okay. And really, do the Republicans want to talk about yet one more young, mentally ill male who got his hands on an AR-15? No, they don't.
Yeah, but you're right. JD Vance blamed Joe Biden's campaign, their rhetoric. So the question I wanted to ask you about is
Of course he did.
it does seem that Trump has always had this notion among his base that he's not just lucky, but that God is on his side, and that the hand of God is guiding all of this, and maybe guiding that bullet to barely miss him. And I think that this cements that notion. So that seems to me to be kind of weird. And I mean, I'm a Christian. I believe in miracles. But if a whole bunch of people believe like that a politician is ordained, what happens if that politician then loses, as happened in 2020? They don't believe it.
I know, they said, well, Donald Trump became president in 2016 because God ordained it. So God ordained 2 terms of Obama? I mean, look, I'm a Christian too. I just don't think God has a party registration card. I don't think heaven is in anybody's particular district. And I think,
but when people fervently, sincerely believe that,
cult,
and a lot
Matt.
of them,
that's his cult. Of course they're going to believe it. They believed it before that. Remember, these are the people who were circulating pictures of Trump in the Oval Office with, Jesus Christ with his hand on his shoulder. When Bush was president, people on the left gave people on the right a lot of static about that. Bush would say that he prayed over major decisions. Well, because people of faith do that. I've prayed over big decisions in my life. You ask for guidance. You ask for, some sort of clarity about what's the right thing to do in your life, what's right for your family, what's the morally right thing to do. What I think is really kind of a creepy and very American version of this is to think that God is a Republican. Like God has a position on HR1. And I think that fills a hole in people where faith ought to be, that politics has now taken root, unfortunately. I'll just a quick line from a priest I know, a Greek Orthodox priest. I once asked him why the Orthodox Church, there's only about 1 million of us in America, so we're a religious minority. But I said, we don't get a lot of lectures from the pulpit about politics. And he said, our assumption is that if you are raised in the Christian church and, your parents brought you up right, that basically you're going to make the right decisions about all the stuff that's in the world. But that's the world's problem. Politics is the stuff that belongs to the world. And that all we do is try to, that the church, and I'm not speaking for the Orthodox Church. This was a bit of wisdom when I was a snotty kid saying, hey, Father, how come the Orthodox Church don't talk about nuclear weapons, Mm-hmm. And he was like, because there's always something. You know, the big issues of 2024 are not the big issues of 1910 or the big issues of, 1805, but the basic moral dilemma for every human being is always the same. That's eternal. And I think it really creeps me out when people think that God is a participant in national politics because he has certain things that he wants done, as a legislative agenda. And I think that's just crazy.
I'm going to ask you about JD Vance. My read was if Donald Trump, like a normal politician who wanted to balance the ticket, grow his coalition, might have gone with Nikki Haley to soften him. I say a normal politician, okay? But Trump could have gone with Marco Rubio or Doug Burgum, and I think that would have been more of a comforting pick. He went JD Vance. To me, that suggests something about Donald Trump, but what do you make of it?
I think it suggests he thinks he's going to win no matter who's on the ticket. I think that's doubling down. Like, oh, you don't like all this MAGA stuff? Screw you. Watch this. I mean, so much of Donald Trump's life basically boils down to screw you. Watch this. I think there's something else, though, that people ought to think about when it comes to picking Vance. No one has betrayed themselves and abased themselves more than JD Vance. Elise Stefanik got close, but Vance staked out a position early as a never Trump guy. The guy is cultural heroin. He could be Hitler. He's a cynical a-hole, on and on and on. And I think it's actually reassuring to Trump that he was willing to betray himself so thoroughly. It's almost like it's comforting for Trump, because that's how you know you're not going to get another Mike Pence. You get a guy like Doug Burgum, and you say, hey, if push comes to shove, is Burgum going to, if I pick up the phone and say, don't certify that election, is Burgum going to do it? I had the sense looking at Doug Burgum that he could be another Mike Pence. He'd say, yeah, I'm on board. I'm totally with you on all this crazy right-wing stuff. But no, I'm not going to violate the Constitution. Rubio, I don't think Rubio was ever a serious contender. He's too short, and he's Hispanic, and all the things that Trump just doesn't like, right? And I think he just yanked Rubio's chain. Haley was never going to happen because he can't stand her, and she was inside. So if she were his running mate, you could say, when you were in the Oval Office with him, didn't he say X, Y, and Z? Vance is perfect. He's young, inexperienced, and completely willing to he's trash can man from the stand. My life for you. He has sold out every principle he ever espoused to be on this ticket. And I think Trump went, that's my guy.
It is weird, though, because a lot of these Republicans had, they're like an officer and a gentleman. I got nowhere else to go. But JD Vance was super rich, and he was a best-selling author. He could have been Malcolm Gladwell or Michael Lewis or Tom Wolfe or something, maybe. Yet he had to be in politics.
Yeah, this is a guy who, he reminds me a lot of Bannon in this way, as strange as it is to say, right? Steve Bannon goes to Harvard, right? Working class kid from Jersey, goes to Harvard, makes big money, goes to Hollywood, and yet always feels like he's an outsider, like somehow he's not being accepted. And I think Vance was, the same way, that this was acceptance. And that when the other big kids in the room said, JD, you should be a senator, he went, okay, this'll be my moment. It's one of the most interesting stories. I'm actually writing something about Vance today. And I was looking at an old story from the Washington Post where his best friend at Yale says the final step for him in his radicalization, in his turn against the elites, was when the movie version of his book bombed, and everybody made fun of it. By the way, interesting. You know this, and some of your listeners may know. I was a Jeopardy champion once upon a time. So here's a cool trivia thing. Glenn Close is one of only 3 people ever to be nominated for an Oscar and a Golden Raspberry at the same time for the same movie. And because I mean, if you've seen it, it is that bad. It's not a good movie. But apparently he was so stung by that it's like, that's it. I'm now, fully over on the other side. And that kind of class transition resentment is very powerful, And so I think that's a big part of what's going on here. And I think you see it with guys like Bannon and Seb Gorka and even Stephen Miller and a few others that this is my affirmation in politics is my final get even with the elites that never let me into the club that I think I should have been let into.
It totally goes against the Rush Limbaugh conservatism I grew up with, which was all about like, don't be a victim, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you know, like, I'm not talking about Reagan, I'm talking about Rush Limbaugh. Like, this whole like chip on your shoulder victimhood thing flies in the face of that.
Yeah, but that's who they are now. That speech last night, one of the things I tweeted out during that speech, because I'm constantly struck by this by both Vance and Trump and others. Republicans now talk to the white working class the way liberal Democrats used to talk to black people in the early 70s. And Republicans used to excoriate that from white liberals, right? I know you're not working, and I know you have 2 kids from two different women, and I know you're on drugs, and you know who's responsible for that? The man, the government, the people, the other people. It's not your fault. This was done to you. You're a victim.
Yeah.
And when people would say that to the black community in 1973, right, when heroin is ripping through Harlem and they're making movies about it because it's such a big deal, conservatives just said, that's terrible. You're killing these people. You're not helping them.
Yeah.
You're not doing anything for them. And now that's exactly where they are now.
And it leads, I mean, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from that to conspiratorial thinking, where the man is a deep state conspiracy. We've heard it recently with the assassination attempt, where people say they tried to stop him with lawfare, and they couldn't stop him. They couldn't sentence him, so instead they tried to kill him.
And ironically, who tweeted that quote you're using? Ben Carson. I mean, amazing. This is the American right has become the far American left of the 1970s. Nothing is your fault. It's all the system. If you're living at home with your parents and addicted to drugs, it's because China and Bill Clinton and China signed NAFTA. One of the things that it was so striking about this is how much these have become like campfire tales. When Vance was going on last night about, now let me just back up and say Vance is 39 and I'm 63. So when Vance is going on about the factory jobs that were taken away, the future that was destroyed, I'm like, dude, that happened when I was a teenager. Those factories have been gone for 40 years. I constantly find myself yelling this at people who talk about deindustrialization. I'm like, that happened a long time ago. And
yeah, there is a weird delay. I see this myself. I'm like, right now there are Republicans and right-wingers who are upset about things that I was pissed off about 20 years ago and got over. There's this weird delay to it.
Well, but that's what I mean about campfire stories.
Why weren't you mad then?
About passing the talking stick around the campfire. In a book I wrote called Our Own Worst Enemy, I pointed out that there was a town. A reporter was talking to people in this town, and they were, you had guys that were like 50, right, saying, well, when they closed down the steel mill, and I'm like, I went and looked it up. The steel mill closed when they were like 2. You know what I mean? It becomes a thing where they sit around. Remember that remember Mad Max, where they sit around the campfire, do the tell, where they tell the story of the Holocaust that destroyed the world, and it's become like that, and I think it's become a rationalization for a new culture that says, I have a right to a certain kind of job and a certain standard of living, and the government owes it to me, and I'm not going to do anything to make that happen.
Yeah.
And I think when that happened in the early 70s through into the early 80s, Republicans were the firmest opponents of all of that kind of talk. And now they're the biggest proponents of that kind of talk because it's aimed at poor whites in swing states.
And as a union member who's out of work, sitting in West Virginia, I think it's BS. Let me ask you this.
Well,
Nikki,
there are more. My colleague David Frum, I think, pointed out that there are more yoga instructors than coal miners in America now. That, we have this armies of unemployed. No, you don't actually, and there aren't that many of the, not here, not in Britain, not in Italy. That this is not armies of unemployed factory workers. Mostly these movements are being led by people who make six figures and have all kinds of racial and social anxieties that really have, and I'll give Vance credit for this. He really took a moment in that speech to try and make it about, like you said, Matt, that was a speech you could almost hear from a Democrat in 1992. Our factory jobs and the Wall Street elites and the people who made deals for cheap junk, I mean, it wasn't recognizably a Republican or conservative speech in any way that you or I would have known.
And he apparently took down his pro-life stance off his website. This is a convention that had a basically porn star. It had the Teamsters.
Well, I'm sitting there watching conventions like, and now here at the Republican convention, family values and traditional America, and old veterans. God bless that guy, that World War II veteran. He was really moving. And now, for your enjoyment, a rap video with a porn star in it. And I was like, what the? Oh, okay. If they had run that same video at the Democratic National Convention, the Republicans would have cut an ad on it.
What if Mitt Romney had moved away from the pro-life issue the way that Team Trump has? I would have been told.
I'm sorry, Matt, go ahead.
I would have been, and I wasn't a big Romney fan, but if Mitt Romney had moved away, I would have been told by the pro-life community that if you support this man, you're selling out everything.
You're doing the devil's work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's ironic because I think Vance is a completely hollow shell when it comes to politics, except I was willing to believe as a recent Catholic convert. I think he converted in like 2019. So that's a conversion in your 30s and rebaptized and all that stuff. Hey, as fellow Christians, I say, great, welcome to the club. But I was willing to accept that the one thing he wasn't completely full of crap about was abortion. As a newly minted Catholic, I assumed that he was like, yeah, this is the one place where I draw the, hard line. And then he does, as you point out, he says, okay, well, we'll just take that off the website. We won't be talking about that anymore. And then alienates his own base on this. I mean, I don't know. I think one thing that we could draw out of this, to get back to kind of broader political analysis, I think that they are going back to the 2016 strategy of, we're not really going to try and broaden the coalition. We are going to squeeze every last angry white vote out of the base we can find.
That's Trump. I mean, that's fan service rather than growing the pie is what he does. And amazingly, it's worked surprisingly well. It hasn't always worked for him, but it's worked better than one would think based on conventional wisdom. It's been, a whirlwind discussion interview. We've covered a lot of ground because it's been that kind of month, that kind of summer. Anything you want to leave us with, Tom?
Yeah, I'd like a vacation. I'd like to stop the world and get off for a bit. But I don't. I I I I actually said this the other day. Here's a classic science fiction reference for all you sci-fi nerds. The great Ray Bradbury story, A Sound of Thunder. I feel like I'm living in that story. That's where a guy goes back in time and he falls off the path and squishes a butterfly in like the Jurassic period while he's hunting a T-Rex. And when he comes back, the whole world's changed because like 3 million years ago, he stepped on one butterfly. I feel like I'm living in that world where every time I turn on the TV, I'm like, I think I said last night, this is the worst episode of Sliders I've ever seen. I can't get used to this right there. There's a 90s reference for you. I can't get used to a world where the most ridiculous things that you would not have even thought to put in a Hollywood script are happening.
And what's so frustrating is how just the worst get on top. Every development in the news or in politics that I see is pretty much bad, negative, concerning, and everyone who gets ahead tends to be a really bad person.
Well, because, and I actually think there's an explanation for that, Matt, and I think it's because people who are basically civic minded and want to do the right thing are boring. And this country can put up with anything except boredom.
Yeah.
I've been working for months now. I've been writing something about George Washington that I'm still working on. And what strikes me is what a good man he was, brave, charming, affable, but boring. He was no John Adams. John Adams was just a raging a-hole who, just couldn't keep his mouth shut, clearly vain, intemperate, what's the expression from the musical? Obnoxious and disliked. George Washington was a paragon of civic virtue, and that made him dull in a way. And we don't have a tolerance for that anymore. The idea that the president should just be this kind of boring guy, or anybody in public life should be boring. I really would love to have just, senior members of Congress, be dull. I would love to have Sunday morning TV. Do you remember what it was like when I know I'm older than you are, but you're still of that generation. Sunday morning talk shows, they were dull. You had to really care about politics to watch those things.
I literally have family. My son was with them, and he wanted to watch the All-Star game. It couldn't do it because they're watching Fox. They're watching the convention. And I'm like, I remember when I was the only person I knew who watched like gavel to gavel convention coverage because it was boring and normal people didn't watch it. They didn't it's just absurd. Like, you'd rather watch that than the All-Star game?
Yeah. I remember being like, what was I, 12 when the Watergate hearings were big news and, constantly airing. And I knew something really important was going on. I could tell like that this was a big deal because it was on TV, but it was also like, this is boring. I don't want to watch it. I almost wish that people could understand that the day-to-day business of government is dull. I've worked in a city hall, I've worked in a state house, and I've worked in Congress. And it's like, what do they? My brother was a cop, and what they say about police work. It's hours of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror, right?
Yeah.
Politics is hours and hours of boredom punctuated by bursts of like freakish energy. And that's all it should be. But people want to watch it. They want it to be a show. And that's gonna make us into a declining. It has made us into a declining empire.
What's crazy is Bernie Sanders just made this point recently, like a week ago, like it should be boring. Who knew? Tom Nichols, always a pleasure. Anything you want to plug?
No, I will just tell people, read The Atlantic, sign up for the Atlantic Daily newsletter, which is free. the newsletter is free, so you can read stuff in there without shelling out. But you really ought to subscribe and join us at The Atlantic, because we're doing some of the best stuff you're going to read about what's going on in America now. So that's my
Indeed.
my
Tom Nichols, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.